first to say is probably that what is the European Union today? I guess it's the biggest achievement of peace all over the world. And it's probably what the United States has been struggling for 60 years of your foreign policy goals that has been Europe whole and free, right? So we are there, you should clap hands, and that's not a failure. What I'm going to do is give you a kind of 3 steps overview of where the European Union actually stands. I will start with why is this constitution, this quote-unquote European constitution, in my sense, very important. I will give you a brief aperçu of what the German EU presidency, as Germany is actually running the European presidency, will try to kind of save this European constitution. And I will move from there to a couple of issues, how I could see a European future for the next 2 or 3 years to come, and what are the sequences that I would guess kind of I can forecast, although forecasting, of course, is always difficult. So why is this constitution, in my sense, very important? And I think to start with the European constitution, quote unquote, it's a constitutional treaty, but let's call it constitution for a second here. This document basically is the end of a 15 years narrative where Europe tried to do political union. And just to give you the historical frame, we started with the Maastricht Treaty. Some of you may have heard of that. 92 Maastricht Treaty constituting political union and the monetary union. We had a couple of other treaties constituting the European Union, out of which 97 Amsterdam Treaty, 2000 the Nice Treaty, and then we went for a constitution. Why that? Because basically, yes, Europe is a complex story and a difficult story. In what happened in Maastricht is that Europe went for the monetary union, and it was a success. The euro has been introduced. You see it over there in these nice kind of Camden pictures, the euro coins, in 2002. But we failed indeed on political union in Maastricht. And we took 15 years to catch up the whole process to constitute a political system around the currency union that actually we have. We failed in Amsterdam. We didn't do the so-called leftovers. I won't be too technical here, but it's much about reducing the numbers of commissioners. It's about extension of majority voting. In short, it means getting the system really supranational. And that hasn't been done from Maastricht to Amsterdam to Nice Treaty to the convention. So then we said, okay, let's take a new approach. Let's do a convention, a European convention, rather than an intergovernmental conference where only the heads and states of government talk about how to make improvements with the European Union. Let's have a parliamentary assembly constituted by citizens of the European Parliament, national parliaments, and let's do a constitutional draft. That has been the European Convention, lasted for 3 years between 2002 and 2004. We had then this constitutional treaty that came up, and that's the document that actually failed in 2005 in the Netherlands and in France. So yes, that was a big failure. Is that important for me? Okay. Just to put this constitution in the context. And we failed, and I'm making a couple of words about why it's so easy to be ridiculous about this European constitution. I have been on many panels with US citizens, kind of, you know, this is the small US constitution, just a short, slim document. You have your 250 pages, it's unreadable, and this and that. I agree with all these arguments. Only the point is that we did our constitution basically last year or 2 years ago, not in 1779. We did it with internet, we did it with radio, and we did it with civic movements that we engaged to provide this document. We had an internet website on the European Union with 16,000 hits per day where people actually could give input what they want to see in this constitution. I think that's a gorgeous idea. It didn't work out, though it was an attempt to have a civic society-driven document, which of course is hard. I have been on several hearings in Brussels. It was fun to see like everything from the European Association of Women down to the European Association of Muslim Town or whatever wanted to have his sentence in the European Constitution. So that's a hard document to draft. And again, it didn't work out. But still, if you take it from the idea, it was a document that we wanted to be close to citizens, that we wanted to have citizens engaged in. And I think that's basically a good thing to do in an internet society. So now we are with the German presidency, and the Germans want to kind of relaunch this constitutional momentum, which is key. Why is it key? I say this up front. It's just key because if there's no institutional change of the institution of the European Union, the European Union will not be able to further enlarge. Further enlargement means not taking the Balkans, not taking Turkey, not taking all the countries that basically the US also wishes to stabilize, and where the US has a key strategic interest in promoting peace and stabilization. organization. The Nice Treaty is bound to 27 countries. If there's no institutional reform in the next 2 years to come, there is no more enlargement, and it's basically that the US then will also see that the foreign policy goals of your country will fail on the European continent because the EU will not be able to shoulder them. And this is why actually I argue that the US should help us with this constitutional document. So what is going to happen, or what do I see for the German presidency? The German EU presidency will be in 3 slots, and I guess you won't get much in the media here in this country about the small sequences of the German EU presidency, but just to be very short on that. The first sequence of the German EU presidency in which we are actually in is committed or dedicated to the Lisbon agenda, to the whole European economic area, knowledge society, how to improve the European economy and this and that. One point essentially, and it's a key point, is that Europe will draft a European Energy Action Plan, and this action plan is supposed to kind of move competences on energy policy on the European level. This is a cornerstone, not because much will happen this spring summit, 8th of March forthcoming, because it's just a starting point. But in the analogy, if you go back to what the European Union has been about, coal and steel community in 1950, with the spirit that you should unite in the European Union the resources that are most dear to everybody and that you need to commonly manage in order to have peace, then energy policy is probably the topic that in the analogy is what coal and steel has been in the 50s. So there's a huge kind of stake to make that Europe will struggle and will find its way to kind of think about how to communitarize or how to put competences on energy policy, on policy mixes, energy policy mixes, and energy security on the European level. There is talk about creating a commissioner for energy policy, which is a youth pooling or transfer of sovereignty. I'm not saying that this is going to be an easy story. I'm not going to say that this is going to be smart or smooth or quick or anything, but this is some momentum that I think is most likely to be observed, and it's an important one because I would argue that in a single market and a currency union, you cannot go for a policy in which, say, in Poland and the Baltic countries, lights are on, lights are off because the pipelines are down, but in Italy and in France, the light is still running. So we need also to kind of Europeanize the resources and the security basis for energy. This is one important point that you will be able to observe. The second is you will see on the 25th of March the special summit of the European Union, which is the summit that is supposed to present a resolution about the new narrative of Europe. Because it's sure that this kind of peace story, although it's really important, and it's hard to, I mean, it's quickly forgotten that peace is something that we don't longer care about just because we have it. But I mean, things you have and you take for granted, the moment you lose them, you only value what you have lost. So that's about the peace story. But I totally agree that even for my kids, the very fact that there's the euro and there's peace, it's not a running argument for the European Union. They couldn't care less. So I need new arguments for the European Union. I need a new project, and the June summit is a summit in which the European Union will try, the heads and states of government, to draft a resolution to tie the new challenges and what the global role of the European Union is supposed to be into a resolution in this March summit. And from there we go to the June summit, June 2007, in which Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, will probably try to relaunch the process of the European Constitution, and why, and how will it function. You have heard that there has been a Dutch no, a French no. I won't go into much to the details, but I think coming just from Brussels and a couple of conferences there, that the chances are not so bad that we will see a document ready by the end of this year. I agree, this document will probably no longer be called constitution because it's indeed a complicated word. We thought to create identity, people didn't like it, so we dropped the wording. So it will probably be another treaty or a basic law treaty or something, but there will be a document that will constitute institutional changes for the European Union. I'm pretty sure of that. Then you have, of course, again, and we will do some deleting and editing actions with this draft document that some of you may have seen, 250 pages. It's indeed a very complex one. We will take out the legal, problematical and unreadable parts of it. We will probably add some chapters on social Europe, migration, and the things that people are really concerned about to make it more accessible to citizens. But we will have a neat and nice and short document, I think, at the end of the year. That leaves us again with the problem of the ratification process. And why I'm saying this? Because one of the biggest problems, but also challenges of the European Union, is probably to make the intellectual jump that you cannot constitute a European society, a European political entity, if you have national breaks in the system, how you get there. What I mean here is that no constitution on earth, even not the one of your country, has been adopted by unanimity. So that is the problem. The European Union, as much as it's still perceived as being a union of citizens on the one hand and a union of states on the other, which is this twofold complexity of the European Union, will at some point need to make the point that, say, a 4/5 majority of both people and states is sufficient to constitute the political entity that is called European Union. Because that is the deadlock, because we have been running around with all this national kind of, blackmailing referenda no's, where basically you end up in a situation where one national country can deadlock or bring to fail a whole process for a European-wide story that is the constitution of the European Union. So what I'm saying here is basically, we Europeans, we need to think about the intellectual rupture or the systemic rupture between constituting a European-wide political entity and giving kind of national blackmailing possibilities if you leave the voting system to do that European thing on the national level. So where's the way? It's just a systemic rupture, and again, no constitution has been ratified by unanimity. Where's the way out? The thing is that there is creativity. I'm not saying that we will find this way out soon. I'm not saying that we find it for 2009 when the new commission will be in place. But there are lots of NGOs out there in Europe that basically are requesting new sorts of accountability, new sorts of democracy. And one thought that is out in the air is to do a European-wide referendum, or if you can't do a European-wide referendum, which is making vote all European citizens on the very single day on the document we want to have, that at least you have national votes on the same day, which would make this kind of detrimental chain that we had, that two countries had voted no, and then a couple of others country basically suspended ratification, that would basically cut short that chain. Because at least you would have the result on one day, which countries out of the 27 have been on the yes side or on the no side. On the other hand, things are not looking that bad. We have 18 countries ratified. We have another 4 in favor. That adds up to 22. We have 5 so-called black sheep. I will tell you that after the French elections, the situation will change in France, and I would bet a bottle of Moët Chandon for that. I would also say that if France goes into the yes camp, then the Dutch won't resist to also be on the yes camp, because the Dutch have a strong affiliation, the Netherlands have a strong affiliation with the European Union. That leaves you with Poland, the Czech Republic, and the UK. I don't want to be politically too incorrect, but the Poles get so much money from the European Union that they will find a solution to be on board in the yes camp. And I would also argue in that domino theory that if Poland is on board, then the Czechs won't resist, although they think they need to resist because they are your best friends, and if they resist, then you please them or they please you. But they won't do it ultimately because it's just a small country, and that leaves us with the UK. And that is really a very interesting question because, as everybody knows, the UK has been all over the place, kind of half in, half out Europe. And at some point, the United Kingdom will just make it change its decision. I would argue that even the United Kingdom, if it comes down to the question, are you the only black sheep? You want to jump or not? You want to quit the European Union or not? It's the United Kingdom that won't say no, because this country is too much engaged in European affairs. They want to run the story, they have difficulties, but I cannot imagine that if you have a clear-cut question on this question, that the United Kingdom is really and ultimately willing to lose its impact on the European continent. There are a couple of economic questions here at stake. I won't go deeper into that, but also, again, if you don't call this document constitution, you make it easier for Gordon Brown, whoever, and I'm pretty confident that there can be a solution. Until the end of the year, we go into a ratification process that will only be parliamentary. But then you have a new document in 2009. Why is this important to have a new document 2009? And I can only say it again. The Nice Treaty regulates and constitutes a European Union for 27 countries, period. If we want to have a stabilization effect on the Balkans, if we want to take Croatia, if we want what you also, the US, wants in the Balkan, which is Serbia, Kosovo, independence, bring these countries into the European Union. If we want to have leverage on Turkey and keep the question whether Turkey ultimately joins or not, to keep it open, if we want to have leverage on Ukraine, let alone Belarus, we need to reconstitute the European Union in order to be able to stem a new wave of enlargement. And this is why I do consider that in broader geostrategic terms, the US administration has a tremendous interest in watching out that constitutional process of the European Union. And it's a pity, so to say, that the administration, this administration, and the previous one, the Bush administration, basically has dismissed what has been a principle of US foreign policy since ever, which is promoting European integration. Because not only Germany has been your baby and is your UNA partner, but European integration was pretty much your idea. And if I may remember, the European movement has been financed by the CIA until '68. So it's not only about conspiracy theory here. It has been just your goal. And what I'm saying here is the dismissive point of the past years is that the US had a policy that was, I would say rightly, but that was too much focused on the enlargement side and therefore had counterproductive effects on the way the discussion went in Europe. The more you pressured us to take Turkey, Ukraine, or whoever, Georgia, into the European Union, the more we felt that's our agenda. And it has been tremendously counterproductive. And if anything, then at least keeping a new balance between promoting the enlargement policies of the European Union, that I can understand that it's a geostrategic interest, but then also give us this feeling that you kind of promote the deepening process of the European Union, because that only allows us to shoulder what we both want in terms of geostrategy. That has been, I think, one of the biggest errors of the administration in place. Changed a bit after Bush and Condoleezza Rice came to Brussels for the first time in 2006, 2005 in February, charming offensive. Oh yeah, it has been called charming offensive. Yeah. It changed a bit, but there's still improvement. So I'm not going to tell you that everything is good in the European Union. I mean, everything is, I guess, as much as bad as in any civilized country that needs to confront biggest problems of globalization. So the story is not easier than in this country. And we have the same reflexes of nationalism, protectionism that you can observe in the US too, in terms of, I mean, I don't need to tell you this. I mean, it's not easy in this country neither. Mexico border, migration, to whom I talk to. I mean, these are also topics which I guess have a strong policy impact in your country. We have the same differences. We have people falling out of the globalization structure. We have workers, blue-collar worker problems. You have so. I mean, I'm not saying that the story in Europe is easier than the story in the United States. Of course, it's all complex. So this is why, of course, in the opinion, if you call European opinion polls on what's the future of the European Union, do people still believe in the story? Yes, it's difficult. I have no problem to admit that this is difficult, because it's difficult to convey, again, the story of peace, when we also convey the story that Europe is going to be a prosperity story, which is just no longer true. And this is one of the problems where you have difficulties also empirically to make the point whether that is due to Europe or whether that is due to Europeization. Because if you lose jobs in France or Germany, it's not so easy to say these jobs are lost because Poland came to the EU and now the jobs are going to Poland. Or do they go straight to, say, Kazakhstan or to China? It's not so easy in the statistics to just find the point that it's in EU enlargement that basically is supposed, quote unquote, to make people poorer, to make them lose jobs in the European Union. So again, that's not an easy argument, and there are difficulties and economic problems ahead, and these problems make that you have, unfortunately, in most of the European countries, a rising right-wing populism in Germany, in Austria, in the Netherlands, in France. Look at the results that Le Pen will probably get at these French elections. So these are, you could call them the losers of the story. Be they the loser of Europeanization, be they the loser of European liberalization policies, or be they the loser of globalization period. That's still the open question, but it's easy to take Brussels as a scapegoat. Having said that, is it wise to renounce on a huge economic transformation process because you have losers? No, we never did. I mean, we had always modernization and transformation processes in economies, and you had always people who dropped out. The only problem is we need to take care of them. I think the momentum is not to stop that momentum of liberalization and of transformation. The problem is to care for those who no longer have the ability to be part of the new system. What I'm saying here is that collective gains do not necessarily mean that you have individual losers. And that's the problem of the European Union. The very fact that we enlarged had collective gains that is readable in all statistics for Poland, for France, for the Netherlands, or for Germany. Having said that, it does not mean that if you are in a construction worker in northern part of Germany, that you have perhaps lost your job just because the Polish worker right 50 kilometers there was then cheaper. So you had an individual loss, but the collective gain is there. So do we stop that story of collective gains because there are some people who lose? The problem of democracies is that those who lose have a vote, and these are the right-wing populist people that you see in Europe and that you see in the polls and who have now the scapegoat story of Brussels. So these are delicate questions. These are difficult questions. We need to find solutions. We need to bring them on board. But I think in some analogy, these questions, the United States has them all. Every country that is confronted with globalization has them. And we need to make sure that this does not entail negative stories for the European Union. What I'm saying here, to make this point even more precise, is that it's not Poland that wins and Germany that loses with enlargement. What is happening that everybody in Poland, as much as in Germany, who is younger than 40, educated and flexible, is winning. And most of the people who are unflexible, not educated and older than 40 are losing. But it's not a problem of playing Poland against Turkey, just that for the problem. I pass on another couple of problems that we can see. Of course, the euro is a problematic story. And we worked hard to get it. We worked 32 years. And yes, there are still asymmetric shocks, and we have a one-size-fits-all monetary policy, which is not easy. Still, I would say that the euro is the biggest achievement that the European Union has seen since '92. I would have wondered what had happened to European currencies after 9/11, when we would have been volatilely floating around this international crisis. I'm very happy that the euro exists, and one can say what you want, but we started with 4% of international currency reserves. We are up to 36. This is, by the way, something that you do not like. Also, something which is that the US is probably losing the Senorage effect. And yes, there are talks about denomination of the Rotterdam oil market in euro, which is also another story that the US probably does not like. Just because, of course, be it psychology or be it economy, real economy, there is a fact that as long as you could believe that everything is traded in dollar, independently from what you do on Earth, that was a nice situation, but this situation is a little bit gone. So that's, and I'm making this point just because it's another structural pattern, and in a way, it reflects pretty much what David Caleo said yesterday. There is this hegemony story here. One of the most ambivalences in the US-European dialogue here is that the US has been always encouraging Europe, go ahead, be stronger, we want you. The problem is that when we did it, you didn't like it that much, because competition is good, but when it starts to be competition for you, then it's a little less good. What I'm saying here is that in '98, for instance, a year before we introduced the euro, you had a prominent professor for economics, I won't go for the name, who wrote in Foreign Affairs that the euro is probably leading Europe and the US to war. To be honest, that was probably the most silly article I've ever seen in Foreign Affairs. And then I had the chance to see the second most stupid article in Foreign Affairs again, a couple of months before we did the Constitution, with basically the same pattern of thought, which is the European Constitution is the biggest threat to US security since World War II. And I felt, no, I don't get the story. I mean, this is what you wanted. Europe, Poland, free, a constituted strong partner for world affairs. Now we do it. Now you don't feel right with that. There is a problem of ambivalence between what you say, what you wish, and what, when you get it, you don't want any longer. And I do normally not much quote Mr. Rumsfeld because I do not like him much, but the American ministers had the opportunity to put their basic philosophy on their websites. And the sentence that Rumsfeld put on his website was, A people choose A people and B people choose C. And in terms of EU-US relations, in the past 6 years, the US rather behaved like a B that looks for a C and not like an A that can stand an A to really improve the world if only we cooperate. That's the point on this euro and on other things here. Going back to Europe. I'm having clear that Europe has problems, many problems. Demography, the euro, the economy, sluggish, many problems, and I won't deny this. Is there still hope? I think the communication needs to change. There is a communication that needs to change in the way that we have too much the reflex that Europe is the problem and not the solution. Europe tends to be the scapegoat and not the answer. We need to better communicate on how to tie the foreign policy problems to the domestic problem situation, which is, for instance, migration, money laundering, this and that, to say, look, the enlargement policy is to stabilize this country, and this impacts on the domestic difficulties. So we need to broaden these arguments, we need to sketch them out, we need to improve them. And this is probably a huge task to do over the next years, just because, as I told you, the situation is, and I'm not denying the situation is difficult. Still, if you look at topics like, for instance, ESDP, European Security and Defense Policy, I would also pledge for patience with the European Union, because that is one topic where also it's a US-EU dialogue. The US is always saying you don't do enough, you don't spend enough, it's not quick enough. The thing is that ESDP, if you call it a young boy, has been born in 1999 at the summit, the Cologne summit of the European Union, 1999. So that makes him 8 years old. So this little 8-year-old kind of common policy of the European Union has now 27 missions engaged in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Congo, and all over the place with more than 100,000 soldiers. I think for an 8-year-old, this is a pretty heavy task already. So again, for the euro, we needed 30 years. There is a time frame to be considered. I'm confident that Europe will work out a foreign minister, a foreign diplomatic service, a European army over time, and a European common defense policy. These things will come, but they need time. And the historical dimension of 8 years, if you sketch it out with the euro, say 30 years, if by 2020, 25, these things are a little bit more fixed, I would still be happy, because my kids, if anything, I would rather like to see them under a blue flag with 12 stars other than a German. So on these things, I think one can be confident. Just another element on this ESDP, because I think it's important, and then I will stop. There is a point here about, and that's important when we're talking ESDP and Europe taking responsibility on its own, there is a point of new narrative that we will need to address constructively, you, the United States and Europe, which is that, in my opinion, NATO can no longer carry transatlantic relation. And that's unfortunate to say, just because you invested so much emotional, financial, and political energy into NATO, but NATO is no longer the institution that allows Europe to voice difference. We saw it with Iran. It's the coalition of the willing. You are either with us or against us. What I'm saying here is that NATO does not offer an institutional frame where we can act together as partners on an equal footing, and where we Europeans can voice difference on given policy issues without being perceived as being your enemy or not on your side. Because we are not your enemy, we're on your side, but sometimes we just have different opinion on how we should deal with things. Look at Iran. And there you see that most of the transatlantic things and tensions we have today, be it Iraq, be it Iran, all these things basically are no longer NATO frame. NATO has nothing to say on Iran. It's a huge transatlantic dispute, and we do not have an institution that is appropriate to deal with it. And we should be creatively thinking into a future where we improve the EU-US relation, because again, in my opinion, NATO can no longer structurally and institutionally hedge our dialogue, and that's a pity. I won't stop on this. With the last little sentence on, because my title, I think, was Uncertain Future of the European Union. Yes, the thing is that the future is always uncertain for most of the people, if you're not a witch or something, and you know more than. I think the strength of the European Union actually is that the European Union is not static. So the whole discourse of what is the future, I think, is the wrong argument. The argument is not that we should look for or seek for the finality of the European Union. It needs to look like this. Here are the institutions. These are the borders. I think that the best asset of the European Union is just that it is not static. In a century that announces to be flexible, I think that's the best asset that the European Union can have, because it's just not rigid and it's not static, and it can evolve and go with the historical situation. I would like to leave this, the discussion or the decision on whether or not Ukraine joins the European Union ultimately to my kids in 2020 and not decide today. I would like to leave that open for a situation of history that may come and that needs to be judged in the historic situation that the European Union will be in there. What it's in favor of the European Union, that it seems to be quite attractive, although all those who are in are not so sure about it if you poll them. But if you're outside of the European Union, we have at least 10 countries who want to join, so our attractivity level seems to be quite high. And I cannot imagine that this is just because we are so bad and we failed all over the place. I will end with a quotation from Jean Monnet, who basically said, you know, Europe is nothing else than unifying the people of the world. But we need to start with one region. Let's take Europe. This is what it was. It's ultimately a pretty cosmopolitan project in the sense of an idea and of an idea building. This is why, in a way, and that's perhaps why Europe is so good in being a role model. See at Asia, see Mercosur, you have a couple of countries that are signing up. Asia is thinking about a currency union. Mercosur is thinking about a currency union. African Union, Islamic Union, of a couple of other regions. The question has been posed yesterday why there couldn't be something like this in the Middle East. So there's a role model out there, and that tells you just one thing. In my sense, Europe is not kind of clear-cut, this institution, this, that. First, I would like to say, as you know of the Greek mythology, Europe is a woman, because that was a woman that has been kind of left away by this Toro in the Greek anecdote. So Europe is a woman. Women are beautiful, and I would just argue that Europe is a beautiful idea. It's just nothing else than a very beautiful idea of mankind, and I think we just pursue it with all the difficulties that it entails. Thank you.